As you all know, in Kabul, there is a special situation that perhaps we would be seeing the dawn of another Islamic Republic. One would not clearly say whether an Islamic Republic is in the offset, but all basics are set for a new Islamic Republic in Afghanistan. Despite the efforts of 20 years, how it happened and what was the mistake? Where did the secular forces go wrong? We have to make a retrospect here with a very clear mind without hesitating to understand the fundamental semantics of the whole thing. Let's first go, what is Taliban? Taliban per se is a student movement starting from the madrasas. There are many Taliban groups, mainly student groups, who sought Islamic education and tried to bring in the Islamic culture into the realm of Afghan scene. At the outset of the facts that's available today, there is every possibility that there'll be a new regime in Afghanistan. And what will be the nature of that regime? There are claims on both sides. One major observation that all the international observers are very clearly saying is that Taliban is brutal as it was earlier. 20 years back, when they had the power in Kabul, they didn't have a government, but they had authority over the city of Kabul and Kandahar and other cities. They have been by force implementing a certain set of rules which they thought right and correct, which included women not allowed to go to schools, all women covering their face and feet and in total parda. And if anybody would decide to defy the orders of Taliban, they would get a summary trial and instant execution. The Taliban soldiers or volunteers, whatever you want to call them, they've been roaming with Kalashnikov guns, which can have a series of shots in one go. And now, the new Taliban groups in control of Kabul city claim that they are a new Taliban. They are not part of the past Taliban, and they have changed. And what do they want to communicate with that? They want to clearly say that they would cooperate with the world community. They would want a regime with international recognition, and they would respect all international laws. That is what is claimed by some of the Taliban leaders. And what would it mean for the education of girls? What would be the status of women in a regime under Taliban? So very clearly, they say that they will be allowed to go to schools, they will be allowed to go to work. That with a comma, an addition comes under the strict laws expressed in Quran and Sharia and the Hadiths. Which means what? Nothing has changed. But in fact, some of the observers very clearly say that they have changed, but not to the good, but to the worst. And what is that worst? Which means earlier Taliban was mainly a bunch of lumpen elements. Lumpen means the street gunners. They have been roaming around, doing whatever they want and expressing every activity, what they do, under the banner of Islam, under the banner of Quran, and they claim that whatever they do was Islam. Well, one can go into Quran and find sanctions for anything, any kind of brutality that they would do. But it was interpreted in a very different way now. For example, let's go to the background of the situation. Then we will come very clearly about the situation. What was Taliban 20 years back? 20 years back, there was a set of people, as I earlier told you, and who were fighting with other student groups for the control of the city or the control of the militant groups. And they had weapons from sources that we do not know officially. But almost one can understand what are the sources. Because when we understand the history of the Kabul situation, then they would understand who was in need to create Taliban and for what purpose. What was the situation of Taliban? In Afghanistan, unlike many other South Asian countries, they got their independence much earlier. They had a kind of a monarchy, a kind of regimented monarchy under the control of the Britishers. But eventually, one finds that the radical groups are getting, much say in the whole situation there. The governments are urged, or they were urged at that time, to go more and more Islamic. As if it's something waited for. They have been taking decisions in that favor. But there's another situation that was at the backdrop. That was the time of the Cold War. In Afghanistan, they were in the borders with Pakistan. Who are the people of Taliban? Mainly they are the people from the northwest frontier province of Pakistan. And they were the tribals who were in control of the tribes with their roles like feudal lords, or later one can call them warlords. And these people have been having their particular sort of regime within whatever national structures they have, with their laws, with implemented in their ways, and they had no other authority above them or below them. In Pakistan, Northwest Frontier Province is part of Pakistan. Now they have changed the name. But the Pakistan regimes never bothered or tried even to change the control of the tribals or the tribal warlords in the Northwest Frontier Province. From the tribal area, one sees a lot of people moving towards Afghanistan at one side, and on the other side, they have been moving on the other side to the main Pakistan, controlling the radical groups. Lashkar-e-Toiba and all these kind of groups were encouraged and financed and supported by the Northwest Frontier Province tribal lords. And interestingly, if you go into the economy of Afghanistan, apart from the natural resources, the major income of Afghanistan, unofficial income, was opium. From times immemorial, opium was the major income. And the warlords, the so-called tribal leaders, they controlled the opium lands, the opium farms. Of course, it's illegal. But the opium farms and the tobacco farms, which they controlled and marketed to Europe or elsewhere in the world, brought in huge sums of money. Since these were illegal transactions, the money went to the warlords or the feudal lords or the farm controllers. And how would they protect their farms? They had their own mercenaries, paid people to protect them. And they bought weapons from all illegal sources all around the world and kept a small army at their disposal. In fact, the tribal lords and their small armies were more powerful than the so-called Afghan regime always. This has been something like an old political system where the emperors or kings did not have their own army, but the feudal lords would have their own army, and they would keep the army, they will maintain the army, they would buy weapons for the army, and whenever it is required, the kings would ask the feudal lords in earlier times to send their army in service of the nation. the feudal lords were allowed to collect the taxes. The revenues were collected by them, and a part of it go to the political system at the center. Rest will be kept by them to maintain their army and their system. In a way, the old feudal system is present in Afghanistan with a new color and new shape. Here, the warlords or the owners of the opium lands are the controllers. They have the army. They have their private army. But most of these people are either coming from the madrasas, also all these people who wanted to survive in this situation where they wanted to use the weapon and feel powerful. They all joined the appropriate warlords. So whenever in any earlier situation, when there was a fight to be done or a government has to take a serious step, they would obtain these mercenaries from the warlords. And whomsoever is controlling the warlords, whomsoever gets the support of the warlords, would rule the country. So it was an authoritarian regime with no military real power. The real politic actually was with the warlords, and they were controlling the situation. This is what something the Americans, after all the 20 years of work, did not understand. Perhaps they were trying to make a regular army with proper training. Before coming to that, what was the interest of the world powers in Afghanistan? Was it the opium or the poppy plants? No. In fact, Afghanistan is geopolitically very important. It's a strategic point. It's a gateway to Central Asia. That's number one. Number two, it can have charged weapons aimed at China and Soviet Union. It's possible. So it's strategically very important. So who would want to control such an area? During the Cold War time, the then Soviet Union was seriously interested in Afghanistan because Soviet Union did not have an open port, means non-frozen port in the winters. There is no single port in Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, which would not be frozen during the winter. They really wanted a warm port. And what's the nearest warm port available? That's in Pakistan, in Karachi. How would they get it? Very simple, two ways only. Either Pakistan should allow a military base in Pakistan for Soviet Union, or they should dismember Pakistan. So there was an interest to come closer to Pakistan, and there was an effort to promote the three different subnational movements in Pakistan as well as in Afghanistan, because some of these lands were overlapping to both these areas. Pakhtunistan, Baluchistan, all these places had separate movements for earlier national groups. For example, the Pakhtunistan movement is very, very active. They identify a kind of nationhood which spreads from the part of Afghanistan and part of Pakistan. They speak a different language, Pashto. And the Pan-Baluchistan movement is also very active. So these were directly and indirectly promoted by Soviet Union. It's well known now. The facts are very clearly analyzed by a lot of political experts. So in the process, that is one of the reasons that United States always kept a close relation with Pakistan, because they were more afraid about Soviet Union getting control over Pakistan than, making India unhappy by being close to Pakistan. One would always think that Soviet Union did not lose an opportunity to win the heart of Pakistan at any moment. When Soviet Union has been taking the initiative to get the Pillai steel plant in India, one should not forget that they have also made a Karachi steel plant in Pakistan. They wanted to keep both the parties very happy, both the parties intact, because India is strategically important because America has a comparatively closer relationship in Pakistan, or Pakistan is a kind of a base for USA. So Soviet Union has a strategic interest in India at that time. But imagine India with a claimed India was presenting itself as a non-aligned country, which is not with Soviet Union, not with United States. It could take its own position. That was the official position that India had, especially during the time of Jawaharlal Nehru. But during the Indira Gandhi regime, we have seen the non-alignment summit that happened in New Delhi had none other than Fidel Castro was clearly a part of the Soviet alliance as the chief guest, where Indira Gandhi publicly embracing him show the solidarity. So that was the end of non-aligned movement practically. And also we see that 1970, with the Bangladesh war, Soviet Union has clearly taken a position which helped India to dismember Pakistan and create the independent and create Bangladesh by promoting the independence movement there. And of course, the army support was very, very clear. There was an agreement between Soviet Union and India of mutual support in case of crisis. So the non-aligned movement was practically killed by India tilting towards Soviet Union at one side, and now slowly Soviet Union advancing towards Afghanistan. So one can see the student movement in Afghanistan growing up against the growing influence of the communists in Afghanistan. The classical mistake that the communists in this area have earlier also done, one major, a parallel example that is important to mention, that was in Iran. When Shah's regime was in power, Shah was a close ally of the West and the US, and there was a movement in Iran against the authority of Shah for redistribution of wealth, redistribution of the national property, which was very discriminatory at that time. And the Tudeh party, the then Communist Party of Iran, was a leading movement against Shah. Of course, parallelly, there was an Islamic movement. But the leader of the Islamic movement was nowhere in Iran. Ayatollah Khomeini was more than 20 years, he was living in Paris because his life was in danger, and he was leading the movement of Iran, the Islamic movement, sitting in Paris and sending tape-recorded speeches through couriers, and that was being distributed. And Communist Party, the Tudeh party, thought that is of no use, but we have to win these people to overthrow Shah, because the communists normally would identify their political enemy on the basis of their judgment about what is imperialism, what is not imperialism, and all these kind of fundamental political positions. So they would find Shah as an agent of imperialism, as they would call, and they wanted to overthrow Shah, and they thought they would be getting the power in Iran. Many people thought so. But what they did not understand, that the religious affiliation of the radical forces was more powerful than the so-called alliance that they had with the communists. Officially, it was the radical left, the urban left, and the Communist Party, the Tudeh party, was the initiator of the struggle against the Shah. The Shah's regime collapsed after the Islamic students, again there, encircling the American embassy, and a big drama, which we all know that. And following that, there was a huge uprising of the student movement there, the Islamic student movement, supported by the Communist Party, thinking that there will be an alliance between the radical Muslims as well as the communists coming to power in Iran. And what happened was totally different. At the outset of the political transfer, when Shah escaped from Iran, came in a chartered flight, Ayatollah Khomeini. He suddenly was the most acceptable leader for the whole folk. And the new Islamic revolution takes power, which had a very determined, very articulate, and very brutal religious leader as its authority. So the regime, when it came to power, it did not share any kind of power with the Tudeh party. It took the full support of the Tudeh party to eliminate all pro-Shah people. The previous regime was almost totally dismantled. And anybody who would have any kind of loyalty to the previous regime was simply butchered, killed, shot dead, beheaded. And the so-called proponents of liberty and freedom that the Communist Party of Iran was then at that time were happy. They did not say a single word when the same still harder brutality was articulated by the new regime of the Islamists, hoping that they will get a share of the power. But in fact, what happened was totally different. In 6 months, all the leaders of the Communist Party, all the leaders of the Tudeh party were arrested, claiming that they were trying to make a political overthrow of the government. A coup was planned, was claimed. All of them were arrested. The trial went on for 6 months. At the end of it, all leaders of the Communist parties were executed. Now, people like Mariam Namazi, for example, was a student communist at that time who was studying in India from Iran. I mean, she would tell the story of how the Communist Party was totally eliminated in Iran. They wanted a kind of a democratic Communist Party coming to power through democratic format, like, for example, like the Indian Communist parties. But that was all not possible. The radical Muslim wanted power in absolute hand. And they had a new regime which was not, for example, officially it's not an authoritarian government, it's a democracy, but a kind of a hybrid system where they have an elected parliament member, a set of parliament members, and they have a prime minister, but above that, the supreme commander is the religious leader. Originally, it was Ayatollah Khomeini. Anything he can veto, any opinion he can surpass, any decision taken by the parliament, he would have to approve. And any elected government he can simply overthrow by just signing a document. Absolute authority. It became a clear theocracy. And there was no question of any progressive forces. Everybody thought one would get a liberal government after Shah goes. Rather, one got a classical theocracy with, I would say that a hybrid theocratic system where there is still election, but religious rulers would make the total control of the system. Why I told this story of Iran is very important when we see the situation in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, when the regime of there's a pro-Moscow regime some years back. In 1970s, the pro-Moscow regime came into power. So that was a big victory for the strategic interests of Soviet Union. They would further advance. Soviet army, in fact, moved to Afghanistan, helped Najibullah to get to seize the power, and he was elected formally as the president of the country. And he was very powerful and very educated person. He had a vision of things. And on the other side, who would be totally upset when the Soviet Union would have such a great say in the affairs of Afghanistan, and the strategic point, because already at that time, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, all these places were part of the Soviet Union. And then they are making the next step to Afghanistan. Iran is already gone to very radical groups. Then the strategic next advancement to the ocean would be Pakistan. And Pakistan is absolutely a unreliable political system, because there have been many military coups there. Any elected government could be overthrown. At least 2 times properly democratically elected governments were overthrown, and these people who overthrow the government remained in power for a long time, and even sometimes like Ayub Khan got elected. So the military has an enormous power in the Pakistan system, so it can be used for any purpose, this way or that way. So therefore, the Taliban was supported by anybody who disliked the Soviet presence and Najibullah's authority, because that was not religion working there, that was not ideology working there. I mean, I'm very clearly mentioning it was neither Islam nor communism. I mean, one dogma and one religion. That was not the key interesting point for the superpowers. Their interest was geopolitical control of the strategic area. And Soviet Union used the ideology, and the other groups countering that tried to overthrow that by using religion. And what happened? We know that one major uprising of Taliban movement, I mean, everything was fine for Najibullah, but one sudden day, a group of people, thousands of them, stormed the palace of the president. And Najibullah was caught, and he was hanged upside down on a crane live and shown all around the city. And the end of it, he was hanged on a lamppost in the Kabul city. That was shocking. Yesterday, he was the president of Afghanistan with full power. And the next day, he was hanging after all public humiliation on a lamppost in a street in Kabul. That was the end of the pro-Moscow regime in Afghanistan. Then there was a series of changes. In the series of changes, there were several groups tried to capture power in Pakistan, in Afghanistan. And who would capture power? It's very clear. Whomsoever had sway over the warlords, the opium chiefs, who had the control of the local, mercenary groups. If you can win the warlords, you win the authority. You could get the political control. If you lose the control of these warlords, then you lose the power, because they decided and they controlled, and it was their say every time. This has been the situation in Afghanistan for almost 2 centuries. One has to understand that also. It's not a new phenomenon. And this phenomenon even now worked. Now, Taliban, once it got the control of the situation, did not officially have a government of Taliban, but they have been controlling everything. Then they started there. That's why people are running away now. Why? They have seen what Taliban was. They have asked women not to go out. And they would kill anybody who would question the authority. Anybody can be executed by any group of people just by making a claim that he has been against the government. There is no legal system or jurisprudence working in order. So it was they who decided what is a crime. It was they who decided how they are to be treated, or it was they who decided how the delivery of justice is to be made, and they decided how the execution was done. Normally, it only took 30 minutes to 40 minutes to get somebody arrested and the trial done and the execution implemented in absolute clear kangaroo courts. And you have seen, you can see, even now in circulation, old videos are still in circulation, that one lady, a poetess, she agreed to be under this regime because she had no other choice. She had been wearing a full body covering parda, eyes little bit opened. But she made a mistake. Her feet were open. That is not liked. But who did not like her? Who did not like her poetry found that as a mistake. I've seen a video of the trial of the lady. She is asked to sit down, and one guy with long beard shouting his judgment or his verdict against her. which runs nearly 5 minutes or 6 minutes. And nothing is asked, nothing is heard. It's a marketplace and people are, video recording it. And then the guy standing near to him, once the verdict is read, or the accusation is read, or the prosecution statement, whatever it is read, he simply shot dead the lady on her head. Similar cases were everywhere in Afghanistan. If you display an advertisement with a female picture, the shops will be burned down. Cinemas are banned. Or women going to schools are banned. Another interest of women, how these mercenaries are maintained. That's an interesting story, how these people are kept. I've studied about military strategies of these warmongering groups in many places. And one major pattern that these people have been doing, Afghanistan is a very poor country. Good food is a rare thing. And the most important attraction is you get 2 full meals every day. You get a meat-based meal, either at noon or dinner. And then you got a kidney beans, rajma, which they call. It's very, very popular with the Afghani people. Rajma with rice for another meal. If you get 2 full meals and a good breakfast, that's enough for many people. And most of these Taliban soldiers were wearing, rubber chappals. They didn't have even normal boots or anything. But they had Kalashnikov in their hands. They were offered good food and good, I would say in quotation, good sex as their fantasy. They were told, these mercenaries were brought in telling that you go and win this area. You go and do this. You are now sent here. What you will get? You can loot the money. A part of it would go to the warlord. A part of it would go to the persons who hire them. And a third would go to the person who loots the money. Any wealth that you collect in a raid, 1/3 will go to the person or the group that holds it. 1/3 will go to the warlords and 1/3 will go to the regime. That was the pattern. So this was a pattern of Muhammad also. If you know, in all wars of the past, this was the way, the soldiers were kept attracted in the war. The looting of the war was shared. It was given. It added to the exchequer of the emperor. It added to the wealth of the soldier. And that was a big attraction. Another attraction was, of course, here booze is not an attraction, but opium was an attraction. But a most important attraction was unlimited number of female bodies to have sex. And how do you get unlimited number of females? That is why they wanted all women above the age of 40 to be captured, to be under their custody. It's not a centralized decision. This is the way how they have been motivated to go into the war. And they want it to be implemented. And how would they get? They have started going to house and look for girls above the age of 14 and enlisting them and catching them and bringing them to their centers. Because that was a promise. It was for this unlimited sexuality that was offered to them. It was for the unlimited looted wealth that was offered to them. These mercenaries were into war. And that is why they are into that. There are immense number of reports coming about this pattern in the earlier Taliban raiding also and at this moment also. This is something the mainstream media is not reporting, but of course there are a lot of reports coming from Afghanistan speaking about the fine details because the mainstream media is more important about the political implications of the whole thing, more than the human rights angle and more than the suffering of the people. And another interesting story is how would many people would think that, they would resist. No, people would not resist. People are afraid. That's why people have been running to the airports to escape from this country. One of the dead bodies that has been fallen from the engine of a machine where somebody wanted to cling on was a medical doctor. And there were people on the wheels of the aeroplane that took 600 people as refugees. It was such a huge rush to escape from Afghanistan. But on the other side, people are buying pardas. It's a country of 40 million people. Only 6,000 or 600 people have escaped. There is no other way to go out of the country than this airport, which is under the control of the US Army now. That is a part of the deal. The Taliban who entered Kabul has agreed, the US authorities, that the embassies and missions would be allowed to take their staff to safe destinations. That's part of the deal. And well, will they do that? Will they be around? One can say that, there are many reports that diplomats failed to reach the airport because there's a huge rush outside the airports. And all around, these lumpen goons, I would say clearly they are not army, they are goons, lumpen goons, roaming around with guns and making their law the way they want it. There is no central control, there is no command, there is no commander. It's a kind of a wild chase of very, very articulated people who think that they have done something and who do not know what to do because there is no command, there is no army, there is no regular system of control of people who are in this process. There are some leaders, but who is the ultimate leader of the Taliban activists? There is no clear leadership pattern. There is no wise leader, even for a theocracy. I would say that if there is a leader with an articulated mind which understands the fundamentals of a political system, like Ayatollah Khomeini or his group in Iran, there is no such leader here. Mainly because most of the leaders were wiped off during the democratization process, which was under the control of the Western forces. Back to after the September 11 attack. There was an effort seriously to identify where this Osama bin Laden would be. As you all must be remembering, the first observation was that he was in the Hindu Kush hills in some cave. Nobody could understand that or imagine that he could be in a comfortable home in Pakistan. So since the warlords were very powerfully controlling this area, and the tribal chiefs had enormous clout in the area, they probably was protecting him was the primary observation. That's why there was carpet bombing on the whole area, targeting any possible cave or any other hiding place to get Osama bin Laden. But he was not there. He was comfortable in Pakistan. That is the situation on Pakistan because military has enormous power there, which can influence the government, which can alter the government, which can change the government, which can influence the policies. And Pakistan officially claimed that they didn't know that Osama bin Laden was there. Probably that was correct also because that's the kind of influence the military has in Pakistan. Again in Pakistan, if any government, if any regime who does not get the support of the military will not remain there long. So therefore, any elected government, any other regime in power would always try to appease the military, which is a very, very prominent force in Pakistan. So that's the situation. And the Secret Service of Pakistan, it's very clearly, is one of the major objectives that they had was to encourage the Pushtun movement and other movements. Of course, when the Afghan regime was not going in their favor, they wanted to use this against Afghanistan. Earlier, this was used against Pakistan when things were not in their favor. Because many countries have an interest in occupying Pakistan at a different border. Strategically, if you say, for example, Pakistan is a permanent, or the terrorist groups in Pakistan are a permanent troublemaking group in the Kashmir area. So if they are occupied in another area or border front, that would be more convenient to a security sense in India. Or all these kind of different factors work cross current. So it's not oversimplified position where one would generalize the whole situation and one can say that, well, that's Islam in its crudest form. No, which partially correct, but it's not partially correct also, because Pakistan, Afghanistan, and this block of locality is a highly complicated political scene, and this scene of political action has to be understood because it is absolutely unique and there is no other similar situation existing anywhere in the world. So what happened during the effort of democratizing Afghanistan? That's something one would understand, that if any country tried to find roots of its democracy with the military help of some other country, it may not work. And it did not work in Afghanistan. US has spent $1 trillion in Afghanistan over 20 years. And where did this money go? To keep up their administration, to keep their army there, their military was present there. But above that, to stabilize the system, they have pumped in money to train their soldiers, to make their own army. They have tried to push in a lot of money. But where did this money go? Initially, it was directly done by the US. But later, the elected governments of Afghanistan, it's well known how the corruption structure works in the whole of South Asia. The elected regimes wanted the money coming through the government, and then they would use it to build up their army and train the army, which was a good idea, which was accepted by United States wholeheartedly, because back in United States, there's a public opinion, because that's a democracy where public opinion counts. There are more and more people coming in opposition against the war, where their children, their brothers, their sisters, their husbands are going in war. So this has to end someday. But there is no result. There is nothing happening. The regime is stabilizing. Every country tried to help Afghanistan. The Afghan parliament was constructed by Indian money, by Indian engineers. And India has made the parliament building. And I've seen images, disturbing images of the parliament house, where this so-called soldiers of Taliban going there, and they haven't seen such equipments, and trying to see the equipments and trying to see the microphone and playing with it, and throwing it and all these kind of things in the parliament house. That's the kind of people who are in the army there, the so-called Taliban army. So Taliban, there is no Taliban army. These are lumpen groups with very sophisticated weapons. So US has been trying to pump in a lot of money. Every country was trying to pump in a lot of money through the regime, and the money, as is well known, I don't want to hide the words, it was siphoned off by the politicians and did not reach the destination. There was no army. They have shown the training centers of these warlords and gave an impression that these are the army that we are training. There was no training. They were not professional people. They could be bought this way or that way. If you give money, they will go this way. If you give money the other way around, more money, they will go to the other way around. So they could win these groups always because there are more and more money coming. But as you know, from the Obama regime itself, there was an effort from the United States to withdraw from Afghanistan. This was not a Biden effort alone. During the Obama regime, it was declared that he would like to withdraw and see that democracy works by itself there, and that look after the situation there. Two reasons. US cannot afford unending money spending in Afghanistan. Number two, there's a criticism all around the world that what's your business there in Afghanistan, in their politics, and let them do their politics, and you should not be there for a long time. You have a vested interest. Of course, they would be sensitive about that. And thirdly, there was criticism within the country for fighting wars in far-off places, like in Vietnam War. So this has been a pressing situation, and Obama started, and even Trump regime, despite the political party stage, Trump also declared that he would withdraw, but they didn't do that. Biden, as a person with a comparatively very empathetic mindset, but I would say that his intelligence information was very weak. As a political leader, he would not relay this kind of intelligence information, because very clearly Biden said that Taliban is not Taliban would not come to power or they would not capture the power, at least for the next several months. There will be huge resistance from the Afghan army. Afghan military was trained by our people. They are very powerful weapons, etc., etc. But they didn't have inside intelligence than the information provided by the system to them. The so-called fine American information system simply failed there. Their judgment was wrong. And people felt helpless because they believed a supporting system there. They believed that they have come out from the traditional system and they wanted a political change, and they came open and they went to schools and they got certificates, they went to sports. Now the sports girls, the women who were in athletics and sports are burning their certificates, burning their medals and their uniform because they will be caught that they have participated in sports, which will be a reason for death penalty. The shops are painting off all the pictures in advertisements which depicts women. And burqas are sold with 8 times or 9 times more price than the previous market price. It was something like the value of Afghan money is very low. It was something like $2.5 was the previous price of a burqa, which is quite a lot of money there. Now it's $37.5 yesterday to buy a pair of burqa, but still it's in great demand because women want to survive. They just want to survive by wearing even burqa. They don't want it. They don't like it. And they would like to have a free life. They have seen what's a different life that they would get otherwise with freedom. But now there is nobody to protect them. They have to go back to the whole old patterns. And also one has to understand that Afghanistan is not an urbanized country. There are only few urban centers. Kabul is a little bit urbanized, but you cannot compare it with any other global capital. Kandahar and some other, of course, there are some few places. These are like very small semi-towns. And the rest of the country, the 40 million people live in poor and pathetic situation. They are not there to fight for anything. They have no capacity to fight for anything. They are just living to survive till they perish someday to death. That's the kind of people that they have. They are very poor people. There is no medical aid available to people. Despite the huge money pumped into Afghanistan, the money has not reached the people. It has not empowered the population there. The money was spent in Kabul. And more than half the money was siphoned off by politicians. The standard of living of people did not change. The people were not equipped and they were not trained to address the system. They were not educated to address a kind of an onslaught of Islam in this format. And interestingly, once the announcement was made, I don't know what kind of intelligence works in the system there. Once this announcement was made that by 31st of August, the American troops would be withdrawn completely. Haven't one noticed, it was in BBC, a very interesting meeting. I've been shocked seeing that. The leaders of Taliban meeting Chinese leaders in Beijing. And then there was an agreement reached upon. The Chinese asked only one thing. That any kind of regime that might come to power in Kabul under the leadership of Taliban would not allow any military station or equipment that is aiming or targeting any place in China. That's the guarantee they wanted. That means there cannot be any military base targeting China or aiming at China from Afghanistan, which the Taliban leaders agreed. The top Taliban leaders, 24 or 26 of them, were in Beijing meeting the top Communist Party leaders. Why it was not taken seriously? Why it was not understood? It's very well known that once Soviet Union wanted a geopolitical control on this area, Now also they are interested. Why? Because the Soviet Union has collapsed, but the Central Asian countries are still in the broad alliance with the present-day Russia, Azerbaijan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, and all these countries. Now, with the presence of Taliban in Afghanistan, if once US goes there, and if Russia gets, whatever is the regime, whatever is kind of regime, that's no matter for big international geopolitical interests. Whether it is extreme radical right or left or anything, which is convenient, that is why Saudi Arabia is supported by the so-called democracies in the world. So where the present day situation would attract Russian interest, because that's an extension in protection of the Central Asian countries. Again, China has a very serious interest in the area because they had no role there earlier. China is an emerging economic power, very strongly emerging, surpassing Russia and all. It's the second largest economic power, and military they are very powerful. And they have no access to this whole area. They have several interests, not only market interest, but also strategic interest. They have been trying to make a railway, covering through this whole area. So now, if you have noticed the statement of Imran Khan, the Premier of Pakistan, he says that it's a great victory of forces for liberty. That's a statement he has. He's, celebrating the victory of Taliban. So it's very clearly, it's a plus point for Pakistan's interest and a emerging support base for China's interests. And from where did they suddenly get all these weapons? You can buy weapons. It's available internationally anywhere. If you give money, black money, which is abundantly available from the opium plantation, and the warlords have enormous clout on money. But did China directly or indirectly support the Taliban by providing them the strategic advice, military strategic advice, and weapons? This is something one has to seriously see. But what was this meeting otherwise for? And day before yesterday, there was another statement of China, very important statement. The statement very clearly says it's advising Taliban to control these local groups which act violently at the regional areas, which means the people who run around with guns and shooting people and making some summary trials and killing people now are identified by China as not part of Taliban, but of lumpen elements or local groups or fringe groups, which the main Taliban should stop so that their image is not tampered. It's all very clear. Nothing more is to be explained. If anybody understands the basics of international politics, the whole pattern is very clear. China is getting a new inroad in the whole area, and Pakistan is very happy about that, which is going to be a big threat to the whole security of South and Southeast Asia. Because though officially the present Taliban says that they have no interest in Kashmir, one should not forget that that was one of their earlier policies, very clearly. So now clearly, this advancement of China, it's imminent, and the ecstatic statements of Pakistan are indication for the new trouble that is in making in South Asia. Though the present day leaders of Taliban, so-called leaders of Taliban, no one knows who is the actual leader, but some of them say that we are not interested in Kashmir anymore. That's a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan. But another leader corrects. That's not our immediate issue, but eventually we would encourage groups who would work on Kashmir, which means that like Pakistan, which supports several radical groups, directly or indirectly, they are supporting several radical groups Though officially Pakistan says we are not doing anything, but these radical groups are doing. But it's obvious that, they are supported. But now there is another interest group who will be supporting these groups. Apart from these mercenaries, it's well known that there are some committed religious leaders or religious activists drawn from different countries in Afghanistan. They are right from so many different countries who thought that they are going to have a holy war. If they get killed, of course, they would get 72 Huris, or not. But in real life, they wanted some good result by getting abundant number of, women to sleep around and power and wealth and all these kind of things. They all are around. So it's going to be their regime for some time, but eventually, what would happen? Why, for example, I was wondering why United Nations has not taken a very clear position, despite broad statements only. It's almost very clear that there are 5 superpowers, and if any of the country would make a veto, any statement on technical grounds, it can be simply rejected. It cannot simply go into currency. So would China or Russia, veto even a resolution? How would even an economic isolation of Afghanistan, if these people come to power, would work? Because one has seen that Iran, it did not work. In North Korea, it did not work. And they have still the opium here, and which can be sold in the international market. And in the black market, it will go, and they can really run the system for a long time. Also, running the system in Afghanistan is not very complicated because the infrastructure is not expensive. Kabul is only a few buildings and very few infrastructure they have to keep up. There is no healthcare system. There is no education system the state is looking after. The rural life is terrible and there is no state working on that. So running a system is so minimal, the expenses in the whole thing involved. So you cannot even, stop all international trade and make sanctions and get these people into control. So that's going to be the danger, which is like a bomb, which can burst any moment. So something one has to do. And what one can do, I have no idea. But I would say that I sense the danger in Afghanistan. And it's more dangerous than Iran. It's more dangerous than many other countries. It's more dangerous than North Korea, I would say. This is so serious. And somehow one has to find a way that this regime does not come to power and there should be a democratic process happening. But who would do that? And how can they do that? So US is no more interested. They want to only evacuate people. And most of the Western European countries are also interested in evacuating their staff members and embassy people. But everybody leaves and give it to some groups eventually who would work in favor of China's interest, or if they support them, keeping in the geopolitical interests that these two countries have, it can eventually grow out of their hand and become another major fanatic group, and the people, 40 million people, would suffer endlessly forever. So it's life of 40 million people are in peril. Of course, they have been not living in a good life earlier also, but they are still going down. All women are, there is no more schools. Schooling is a crime. Girls going out after puberty is not accepted. Showing their face is not accepted. When you are on a street, if you are a girl, and if you take the first conversation to a man, you can be whipped 100 times for that. There is enormous amount of pressure coming to people. And above all, that will be the breeding ground for a lot of radical extremist terrorist groups. And the danger is multifarious. And who would do something to stop this? Can NATO do something? I have no idea. Will that be justified? I'm not a person to judge that. But things have gone out of hand is what I feel. And what's the solution? The world community has to sit and find a solution. But it's a very dangerous situation. And the danger is much more than what we imagine. It will above all, once they establish a new state, which is an emirate, which works in the 7th century pattern, that would be encouragement to a lot of radical groups all around the world. The Iran Islamic Revolution was a breeding ground for radical groups all around the world after that. I mean, it has been propping up already. They saw a model. So this would be an additional element of motivation for extreme and radical and fanatic groups. And we would be hearing more and more fanatic vocal groups taking weapons and trying to advance their positions through violence. So unless this is stopped, this will have multifarious, dangerous influence over the world. Not only that, these 40 million people who will decay under the system, which is also very, very sad, it can have a larger impact on a bigger part of the whole world. And US is not interested. They just want to wash their hands and go off without much hurt. And most of the countries are now interested only in getting their embassy staff safe out from the country. And after that, well, I don't have an answer. I would like to watch and wait. And I would like to see that world goes in a better direction towards more tolerant societies, towards more, socially acceptable rules existing, and people moving forward, not put back to 7th century. Thank you very much. Now, you may ask some questions, or some comments if you want, and then we can discuss about that.
Hello.
Yeah, Shreyas, would Shreyas speak? First of all, let's come one by one. Shreyas first.
Yeah, thank you, Sanal, for this talk. Actually, I wanted to understand, like, why would China, like, what's your opinion on why would China empower, like, fundamentalist Islamic institution like the Taliban? That makes no sense to me. Like, given that, in China, they are not very tolerant of, people practicing Islam or something like that. So why would they do that?
Yeah, Shreyas, have you been in the meeting from the very beginning or came late?
Yeah, actually, I came late.
Yeah, we have discussed it in detail, in fact, what was China's interest.
All right, yeah. I'll look at...
I'll brief it. China has a geopolitical interest in the whole area. Number one, when Taliban leaders, some weeks back, many of the top Taliban leaders have been visiting Beijing and talking to the top Communist Party leaders. And the agreement arrived at, which was reported worldwide, was as simple. They would not allow any arsenal aiming China in Afghanistan. That's a geopolitical and strategic interest of China, number one. Number two, about the Muslim radical groups in China, which the regime is not very happy with, Uyghur Muslims, and Taliban agreed that they would not take up their case. This was the mutual agreement. This was the official mutual agreement. With this condition, China would find, if Taliban comes to power, they have no problem. But I would see much more, in fact. Where did they get all these weapons in such a short span of time, which US intelligence did not understand? Not only from these warlords, probably from the warlords also. They have perhaps opium against many of this stuff and weapons, but they suddenly had a lot of weapons. A lot, in fact, and more, big fighters and all these kind of, equipments they had. Aircraft, the guns that can address aircrafts and all these kind of things, suddenly they got. They had it earlier also, but suddenly they have a huge amount of money to buy all this kind of stuff. And these were not the kind of weapons that they were in control till recently. That is why, and America always believed that, they have equipped the military and they would do. Of course, they didn't understand the system that is full of corruption. The money was siphoned off and they've been simply showing the viable, these landlords, mercenaries. But in any case, China has a clear strategic interest, military interest, and China has a trade route, a railroad coming there. And China earlier did not have any interest in the whole area. They did not have any say in the whole area. Earlier, it was a battleground of two superpowers during Cold War times, Soviet Union and USA. And there's a pro-Moscow government under the leadership of Najibullah, and the Taliban at that time overthrown him and hanged him on a lamppost. And I mean, that is a long story of power struggle in the interest of the two superpowers. Now Russia is not a player there. Now China is emerging as a new player. That's the interest. Thank you. This we have discussed in detail. So Shirajum Monira from Bangladesh. She's an ex-Muslim from Bangladesh. Please, come on.
Yeah, okay. I actually came quite late. So if you answered this before, so I don't know, but I can just repeat the question anyway. So yeah, you told me about this communists helping Islamic regime to form in the beginning, right, in Iran. And that kind of strike this question in my brain, like, didn't communists learn anything? I mean, these people are supposed to be like politicians, like compared to a random scientist like me, I really expect them to know more about Islamic fundamentalism, like how far it can go and how quickly it can brainwash people. And as an ex-Muslim, you know that I myself have been brainwashed by my family members, some of my family members before. And to be honest, like I knew nothing of it. And if I never came abroad, I don't know, I would be Taliban sympathizer, you know? So like, I don't understand why communists or leftists, like liberal leftists, even I saw really, really highly educated people saying that the problem is not Islamic fundamentalism, but the problem is only the Americans and, you know, Russians, they are the problems. But I personally feel the problems are not only Americans and Russians, but also Islamic fundamentalism being a perfect weapon to weaponize. So how do you feel about?
You have seen what is the power of the fundamentalist groups and what kind of activities these fundamentalist groups can indulge in. Bangladesh, which you have experienced and you have seen in real eye there. What happens is, you know, you cannot oversimplify such a complicated situation, like calling it just Islamic fundamentalism. That's an oversimplification of a very complicated situation. It's a war-torn country with a lot of economic interest and a lot of, you know, even the Islamic groups, even their own theology of different Taliban groups are different. Some people say that women can go to school. Some say they cannot. Some say that women can work. Some say they cannot. And some say that they should not show their feet. And some say that if you show your feet, you have to be executed. So there are different forms of theological interpretations, which they call fatwa, as you know, is rampant in Afghanistan. Unlike Iran, so Iran had a supreme leader. Though Ayatollah Khomeini was living in Paris and leading the whole movement, he was a very articulate and shrewd politician who understands the mechanism of a government. Whereas in Taliban, there is no such structures there. There are lumpen elements. On the other way, I mean, one can say street goons with weapons, Kalashnikov in their hand, and who think that what they speak is Islam and what they do is the wish of Allah. So therefore, they have what is fundamentalism? Fundamentalism is one goes into the fundamental philosophy based on an understanding of their own faith and trying to implement it in such brutal ways where any other justification would not be acceptable. But here, even fundamentalism works in a different way because there is no one way of understanding or evaluating the situation in Afghanistan by different groups. They are contradicting each other. They try to kill each other. Earlier, different Taliban means madrasa student. I mean, these different Taliban groups even try to eliminate each other. That may also happen now because for the leadership, there will be fresh struggles. So now, why they would do that and why communists did not study? Because, see, communism is not an intellectual force which is guided by one central brain or something like that. These are movements which are happening in different countries. Their drive I mean, I would like to see the communist movement, especially the democratic communist parties, with a kind heart, because they are trying to change the system for a better way. I don't accept any kind of revolutionary communist parties because they use violence, and that's not a means for any kind of political achievement. But I would not have any problem with the democratic communist parties who would work under the regimes and who would go for elections and all, like the Indian communist parties or the Iranian communist party wanted to be in the democratic process. But they thought their judgment about things is based on their understanding who is the first enemy, a class enemy. And for them, it was Shah, because he was an ally of the imperialist. In their terminology, Shah is an ally of the imperialist forces. So any kind of grand alliance against the imperialist ally would be justified as per their what you call dogma or theology or whatever it is. That was justified. That's the frame that they have. They cannot think out of this box. Ground realities are different. You cannot always fix an ideological position and say that now imperialist is an enemy and anybody we cooperate. You have to understand the ground realities detached from your basic fundamental premises. Then only real politics will work. The detachment from real politics is the problem with the communist parties. Because they did not understand in Iran that a fanatic regime under the powerful leadership of a religious leader can later overthrow them. It's happened in Indonesia, we have seen. Suharto's time, all the communist leaders were hanged there. They've been supporting the system, but where are the communist leaders now? They were all hanged. You know, that's a classical way of eliminating one group. You allege them for a coup. Like in Germany, somebody has burned the parliament and a lot of communists have been, identified and eliminated. I mean, not now, during Hitler's time. But this is the pattern. So they were supporting the system. They were supporting the political change in Iran. After 6 months, once the system is established, Shah's supporters were eliminated and executed. Now the only people who are the competing force of power was the Communist Party, which had a huge base. Whereas the radical groups did not have such a group base, it has a mass around them, not a systematic organized cadre that they have. But the Communist parties had a cadre. Therefore, they waited for the right time. They got their support. Once the pro-Shah factories were removed, then they made suddenly a new clarion call, telling that, look, these people tried to overthrow our government. Catch all of them. Execute. And where is the Communist Party? Today party, which once many people thought would rule Iran after Shah, is nowhere existing there. Not a single communist in Iran now. Any communist there in Iran would be living in London now. That is the mistake. That is the mistake that there is no... See, the communist parties were very powerful. Najibullah was supported by the pro-communist government there. Where are the communists there? They are not there. They are absolutely out of question there. And China is not interested in communist parties or anything. They are interested in becoming the next superpower. That's their interest. They have economic interest, they have geopolitical interest, and strategic importance is what they are looking for. So, what would one study from this for the communist parties? I would say that history should be the biggest lesson. And anybody who does not understand their lessons or study their lessons from history will have to pay the prices again and again. Anyway, thank you for that. Thank you. Now, Dr. N. Ashok Kumar.
Actually, for communism still evolving, it is not fully established or grown up, still evolving. It has got so many failures, but still evolving. I think so. Religious fundamentalism still not immediate enemy for the communism. It is the imperialism, American imperialism, that is more important for the communism now, because it is the American imperialism. It will wipe off Chinese communism, entire communism of the world. It has got some such superpower, American imperialism. That is why they are more concentrating on American imperialism, because that is why they are developing so much superpower like that. Because unless, because religion is not direct enemy to the communism. It is distant enemy. It is distant enemy. That is why, in fact, they may utilize religious fundamentalist people, all these things, because American
Okay,
imperialism
is that a
is
question or a
more
statement?
dangerous than for the imperialism. I think so, like that. I don't know. Am I correct or not?
Yeah, I will. I know that argument. I'll speak about that. Communists generally believe that American imperialism is the biggest enemy. Why? Because they considered during the Cold War times Soviet Union as the great socialist example, and they are in conflict with United States. So the terminology of American imperialism was coming from Soviet Union. America did not do any imperialist design in India, for example. The imperial forces in India was the British authorities. Our fight was the imperialism that we experienced in India was the British forces for 200 years. And when the Indians were fighting against the British authorities, you know the story, 1942, the Quit India movement. The biggest imperialist force at that time was Britain, and we have been fighting against that. Quit India, leave India was the struggle. The communist parties opposed that because they supported the imperialists at that time, because they had another great enemy at that time, that was fascism. Because Soviet Union was fighting against fascism. So they thought Soviet Union's enemy is our enemy. Fascism is a bigger danger. It was a danger. Of course, it was a big danger. But Indian independence struggle would not have any impact on the fight against fascism. But now we know that the British Communist Party has influenced Indian Communist Party, and they denounced the Quit India movement, and they passed resolution against the Quit India movement. And when India got independence, the Indian Communist Party said that that's not independence. We don't accept this independence. Every 15th of August every year till 1948, they raised not the national flag but a black flag in protest, telling that this is not independence. Then they had the Calcutta thesis, calling for revolution in India. When that failed and the Communist Party is banned, and later that was another deal coming up. And of course, then the ideas were changed and the ban was taken off, and Nehru was trying to accommodate the communist movement in the social system. And that is how communist parties came back to the mainstream of Indian politics. At that time, the real imperialism that India experienced, which was Britain, was not an enemy for the Indian communist parties, but it was the enemy of Soviet Union was the opponent. And Cold War times, it was the enemy of Soviet Union's interest was Communist Party's interest. In other words, when there was rain in Soviet Union, the Indian communists immediately opened an umbrella here in India. That was the problem with the Communist Party. They did not accept the ground realities. That's what I was trying to say. Because they had cliches. Ground reality and real politics are things they have to understand and study. In Iran, they should have understood the danger of, say for example, overthrowing Shah did not bring anything better. That is where political wisdom should work. A long-term political wisdom and statesmanship should foresee the danger of the Islamic regime coming, which is more dangerous to human welfare, more dangerous to the whole world, was the theocracy that came after that. Much, much dangerous than Shah's regime. Understanding that, understanding the danger of the religious extremism coming in power is something the communists are not taking seriously. Because for them, it's the economic classes that divide everything. So imperialism is connected with an economic power center based on United States. And as you suggested that United States will, of course, if communism grows in China, United States will take care of it, stop it. That is why we need not bother it. But on the other hand, there is no communism in China. There is no communism in China. What they practice is a kind of a form of reformed capitalism. Very clearly, because it's based on capital. In communist ideology, capital is the labor force. The value is decided not on the wealth that is created, but the value of the labor invested. That's the fundamental of communist economy. In China, they clearly make the Western idea of capital, Adam Smith's idea about capital and wealth. That is what China is practicing. And they are amassing wealth. And United States will not have any interest to damage China, because it's in the interest of United States that China should remain. China should remain probably as a low-paid country is also in the interest of United States, because China is the production center of United States. I mean, you have an Apple phone. It's produced in China because labor is very cheap in China and trade unionism is banned in China. And if it's produced in Europe, you have to pay huge monies, and trade unionism is very powerful there in many parts of in Europe. So it's an easy thing to produce in China. If China goes, one can go to North Korea to produce, because it will be again a powerful regime that will suppress its workers, will be always good for cheap production. So China's remaining like this as a production center and earning money from that would be of interest to United States, and United States would not want China to fail, because that will affect their economy. It's in the so-called imperialist economic interest is keeping China running, and it's China's interest to have United States as a great producer, and it is United States' interest to have China as a great producer. It's a kind of fitting correlation that they have. But the interest of China is more than making money. Once they have money, they want more power. That is why what Soviet Union has been trying earlier, there is no ideology, there is no religion here. It's only geopolitical interest. There is no ideology working here. Religion is a tool, ideology is a tool, dogma is a tool, and these all are in the hands of the power mongers. The poor people who think that it's their religion, it's their fatwa, it's their ideology that's working. No, it's not correct. It's easy to entrap people with this kind of stuff. Religion is a tool of exploitation. Ideology is a tool of exploitation. Every dogma is a tool of exploitation. That's what we have to tell people, to come out of freedom, to come out of the clutches of all these kind of things. But don't expect wrongly that imperialism is a great problem and America is going to control China, and this classical division, this binary division no more exists in the world. That's an old time of Cold War times. Thank you anyway for your observation and your opinion. Now I would call Amarnath.
Yeah, sir, good evening.
Yes.
Sir, my question actually, do you consider US military intelligence made a serious fall by measuring this Taliban movement? That means they will come to power. Actually, Biden was 2 days before there was a speech by Biden, and he was saying that it was actually they didn't think that these things will happen. It's in this fastest course. Actually, that was his speech. The crux of that his speech was that actually what I understood. And do you consider this a serious fall of military intelligence, or anyhow US intelligence? And yeah, that's the main game, because again also this actually they're saying there was a corruption going on under the Ghani government, which was the whole the money. So do you consider it as a fall of US intelligence?
Yeah, US is not the old US, which understood even the little snail, walking on the earth with their satellites. Their intelligence is very weak. And also, they were concerned more about the money spent now there. Because US economy is not very comfortable now. Because they cannot afford spending $1 trillion in some other country which is not even supported or liked by its own population there in United States. So there was a serious military, misjudgment, miscalculation about the whole thing. Perhaps they understood it, but somehow they wanted to get off from the whole situation. I would feel shocked if this was a military misjudgment or misunderstanding. But if that was the case, one cannot further rely United States. No country would rely United States anymore on strategic things for a long time. This was a serious mistake, if that was so. It sounds so. At least the Chinese interference and Chinese advancement by supporting these people was something that nobody is wanting to speak publicly. The reality is a little shocking. So apparently there was a military intelligence failure, or they understood that the money is simply siphoned off and no military is trained, and the guys are simply siphoning off the money. So then go with your system, and we want to get our head and our hands off from the system. Perhaps that was the approach also. More than what happens in Afghanistan, US is interested in their national issues. Thank you. Chandrahasa, Kunyatur Chandrahasa. Please unmute and speak.
Good evening, Sanal. Regarding this Afghan crisis, of course, this United States 20 years, they put a lot of money, but unfortunately, at the end of this one, that money did not go to improve the country or the install a very strong democratic setup also was not possible. And now the America is leaving, but they have, it looks like that they have the support of Soviet Union, and as you clearly said, China, and also Iran. Of course, Pakistan is there on the other side always. And in these situations, you see the position of the India. We have not entered into any dialogue with the Taliban so far. All the time we supported a democratically elected government, and we also put a lot of money for the infrastructure development in Afghan. In the light of this, we are not initiating so far any dialogue with the Taliban. And looking into the future and our interest in Kashmir, will you have very broadly touched that aspect that they may have only future some interest in Kashmir, but to me it looks like that Pakistan is very all the time they are harping to get into that quarrel. And in the light of that, what is your opinion? Will it immediately impact India, or is it correct on our part to not to take any sides as of now, or is it getting delayed? What is your observation?
Yeah, see, my area of study in university, I mean, I've been studying international studies. That was this area: Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh. This was my area of specialization. That's why I know very deep about this area also. I would say that I would not say that this position taken by a section of the leaders of Taliban to please the world community that it's all bilateral issues, that is a tactics only. Immediately that was corrected by some other people. No, our commitment is there. So because they have no central policy, there is no regulation of policies there. So policies are formulated in a system. For example, in any developed country, the policies are formulated, or developing country even, I mean, policies are formulated by experts of the subject. The defense departments in various countries have different desks, and they are studying, and experts are studying the possibilities, and they are putting proposals, and it's a long process how the policies are made. The national interest is taken care of, the other international obligations are taken care of, and that's how policies are formed. But here, for Taliban, there is no regime now. There is no government now. They're trying to establish a government only. They have no government. There is no elected format. So one proposal is that they have a temporary government and there should be a democratic process, which is something they should have done earlier also. For example, when the whole world was supporting Afghanistan, we have been putting in money there. Everybody, India was also putting in a lot of money. I mean, I told the parliament was made by India. But they still had a blasphemy law in Afghanistan with the new democratic government. And if you criticize Quran, you could get a death penalty even under the democratic government of Afghanistan. So instead of taking a democratic and liberal path, they tried to appease these people because their support base, they always understood, was the warlords and the opium mafia, not the support that came from outside. That is why later they said that don't give money to train our people, give to our government, we will train them. This money was given to the opium lords and their training at the local areas, which was a terrible misjudgment. As you rightly said, very rightly said, I think I have casually mentioned that, I will go specifically also. Russia has an interest. because their allies in the Central Asia are close to that, the proximity. And I mean, of course, Soviet Union itself had an interest in Afghanistan. They lost the interest. Now the player, United States, has escaped from there. Every Western force feels ditched practically. They all feel that, come on, I mean, this is not the way. Even Boris, of Britain very clearly said that, I mean, we cannot rely on such a situation. They were not consulted even. So everybody feel betrayed by the quick way the United States handled the situation. So now the one player is out. The other interesting forces are there. Who are the other interesting forces? Western forces are interested, but they have NATO only now. But it's a collective effort. Nobody wants to do it by themselves. Russia has an interest, but China has more clear interest and involvement in this system. So Pakistan is overwhelmingly supporting the whole thing. So an imminent threat at Kashmir, not only as an Indian I am speaking, but I'm trying to detach myself from the whole scene for the security of whole of South Asia. This is going to be a great threat when they support the radical groups in Pakistan and advance to more fanatic, advancing more fanatic groups into Kashmir, and Kashmir becoming another, fighting front. So that's an imminent danger. It can come anytime. Their words are, don't trust this Taliban, because what they say is just to come to power now. And it can be a danger. That's what India should, as a major regional power force. But that is what Indian strategic leaders should think about, because there is a danger about, these groups advancing to Kashmir and Pakistan being openly supporting them, China anyway indirectly supporting them, and officially giving a kind of sanction, though the government is not established and they didn't recognize it. And Russia can be there supporting, and Iran would certainly like a new détente, a power balance emerging there. So this is the right observation that you have. Iran, Russia, China, Pakistan. There is a new alignment coming. And India cannot deal with these people because that's not a government. That's the kind of lumpen groups only. These people can handle it because they have been behind it. Their secret services have been supporting it. And that is why they could get to Kabul that fast. So we will be able to, as I said, I don't want to say we as Indian here. I want to detach this from the scene and try to see it as a political scene. India should take this situation very seriously, closely watch, but wait and watch. India should not get into any adventures at this moment, because that can be very heavy. But very closely watch and see, calculate with all different possibilities. And India has to seriously think about its security, vis-a-vis what happened in Afghanistan. You're very, very correct in their observation. Thank you. Now, Unnikrishnan and then Mrs. Matthews.
Hello, it is audible?
Yeah, yes,
Sir,
yes.
Mr. Sanal, as you said, it is a war of, I can say it is a war of the game in between. The global war is going on instead of a trade war. I can use the trade war and biological war for the COVID area. Now, the people don't want to involve in the Kashmir area, the beauty of the nature. You can see the Himalaya and Kashmir and the observation of the Kashmir products and Afghanistani product. Okay, opium is one of the product, as you said. So I feel the 11th September is made by not America. It's behind the Taliban, or some people is behind the 11th September. It's a trick of the demolishing of the building. As my observation, if I am wrong, you can correct me. It's how to demolish with the flight for the proposed area, how to demolish a building of this tall building within seconds or minutes. This is a technical observation. The same way, Taliban is the another way of the technical observation of the land area, how control the Asia from Europe and American people. This is my observation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, I don't know whether you're trying to say that the conspiracy theory about the the demolition of a building perhaps by an insider joke, but there is no substantial evidence for that theory so far. I mean, I've gone into all different theories presented by different groups, etc., etc. But more than people want conspiracy theories, and people are very happy with that. I mean, that big players are moving things, and of course, but these big players are sometimes failing also. That also we have to see. Nobody is sitting there and making the great moves, and we are all just, pawns in the hands of some big powers. For example, America's calculations failed in Afghanistan. That also, America is not a big power. Of course, America's economy is very powerful. Its military is one of the strongest in the world. But all the same, they have made mistakes. In Vietnam, they made a mistake. It was a strategic mistake. They had to withdraw. And after 20 years of effort, they had to go back. Because the main mistake was what they tried was simply supporting this government by training the military. Rather, if they tried to establish a new society there, by reaching out these 40 million people, educating them. Now, if the new whole generation, for example, when United States came, the children at that time with 5 years to 10 years, if they were educated with modern education, with scientific ideas, with liberal thought, they would be now, what age? They would be now 30 years to 55 years. And if that process started, if they have been busy with educating the new generation, changing the society and the mindset of the people, rather they tried to compromise on all these kind of things and tried to build up buildings only and put money on the military. Changing minds are more important than building military. If they change the mindset of the people, they would reject these extremist forces or Taliban forces. But now they are all succumbing. There would have been a new leadership emerging with clear understanding, new patterns, a democratic pattern where larger participation of the people. That all did not happen. The democratization process was only building up, establishments. There is no rule of law properly. There is no jurisprudence working properly. There is no clear division of power properly. There is no check and balances properly. And the redistribution of the wealth and taking care of the health of the people and the education of the people and the welfare of the people. The 40 million people were just thrown to dust and the money was put in Kabul. That was the mistake. Then it's like the Indian caste system. The emperors were making their big wealth there in the power centers. When big powers attacked, the people looked at it and they laughed. They could not do anything than surrendering to it because they were not part of the process. That was the mistake that US has done. There is no other mistake, I would say. If the whole effort was to rebuild the country, to make infrastructure all over the country, and equip the people, educate the people, and if the process was on, there would have been natural resistance and efficient people coming up to counter it. That was the failure. That is what nobody can, for a long time, play big games sitting from somewhere else. It doesn't work for a long time. So that is why it has failed in Vietnam. That is why it has failed in Afghanistan, no matter whether one was ideology and one is a religion. But at the end of the day, the people, if they are equipped, it's not very easy to have such sudden big changes. That's an irony of situation. Saptarshi Bhattacharya, thank you very much anyway. First Mrs. Kunyama Matthews and then Saptarshi Bhattacharya and Unikrishnan. There we end. Mrs.
Good evening. Thank you very much for your talk. It was very interesting. And I was also following what is happening in Afghanistan. Well, I always follow what all the political parties are doing. And it was very nice talk. But I'm very happy that the United States withdrew from Afghanistan. 100% I support them because it was just a waste of money, over $2 trillion. It didn't get nowhere. And the parties like China, if they want to spend money, let them. And Taliban know how to siphon them too. No problem, let them do it. Whoever want to put money, let them put it and let them fight the war. But I understand our government of India is training like 700 to 800 Afghanistan citizens in our military bases there. And also I heard they are planning to extend their visas. And also there are students in JNU University, like 22 students of Afghan descent. And they are also planning to extend their visas. So And also in about 30 small towns, India has programs to develop Afghanistan. I'd like to see to continue that. I don't know at this context how this will work. Of course, China, Pakistan, of course, it's a threat for India, especially in Kashmir. Kashmir has a lot of Indian forces. I think Narendra Modi already posted. So I hope for somehow Afghans' pain of the people, especially women and children, may be solved, something like that. No, not only America is bringing American people, America bringing 65,000 Afghan citizens also, along with the lift from there. That's what they are working. This is what I understand.
So one point that you said, as a citizen of USA living in the United States, the feeling of in USA, I fully understand and appreciate that most of the people in the United States, as I understand, are relieved that USA has stopped spending money in Afghanistan. It's not a big game plan and these are pawns, but the American people generally, the public opinion matters in America, and that is one of the major reasons. US cannot further afford to spend money without any result, but this money was not spent correctly. That's what I was trying to say. It was to be spent to build up infrastructure, build up people, to educate people, to develop scientific attitude of people. If that was spent on building up individuals at that time, last 20 years back, the whole new generation would have been coming up to leadership to change this country. Building up people is the way, not training military. Anyway, thank you for the thought. And also giving a clear understanding about how people in America think, since you are in USA. Thank you. I would say Saptarshi Bhattacharya.
Good evening, sir.
Sir, please.
Sir, I would like to ask 3 points actually. Number one, from India's point, we are discussing about Kashmir, but we have seen that radicalized people from Kerala have also joined ISIS, and I was looking at Twitter in Mr. Shashi Tharoor's timeline. He was saying that even in Taliban, there are radicalized people from Kerala who have joined Taliban. So how do you see Taliban mentality not only coming to Kashmir, but entering Indian population as such, the mainland population, if I can say so? Number two, do you see USA using India as a member of Quad to balance China, so that China is sort of told not to interfere in Ladakh and those areas, and Quad will not interfere in South China Sea? And the third point, which I would like to know, which means on the human side, that for rational things or democratic values, why no one stood up to take even a single bullet in Afghanistan? Do you think it is totally a lost place now, because no one is ready to fight, because this seems like a lost battle? Do you think the people there don't care now whether there is democracy or not, because the issue is about living even if they are able to live a dignified life, it is more than enough. They will not, why should they die? Because they have been dying for last 50 years and nothing has come about. So it is a cynical view, but why should they die now for anyone?
Yeah, good.
So
the first point that you asked about the radical groups from Kerala I was born in Kerala and I'm a Malayali I'm an Indian, but I'm originally from the southern part of India, from Kerala. So therefore I can tell that I'm reading the Malayalam newspapers and following Malayalam televisions also occasionally. And I know that I've seen the tweet of Shashi Tharoor, the parliament member, brilliant guy from Trivandrum. He heard a conversation in Malayalam language in a Taliban clipping. Shockingly, there are many, also there were women recruited from Kerala in the ISIS who are who were in prison in Afghanistan. Now, as you know, that when Taliban came to Kabul, they opened the prisons and liberated all ISIS people. They simply set them free now. So there are Kerala. Some parts of Kerala is very, very radicalized. Radicalized in the sense that radical Muslim forces have enormous control in many parts of Kerala. for writing a question paper with Muhammad's name. Some radical Muslim group has chopped off his hand some years back. I've interviewed him also. And so there is no dearth for any information about that. I mean, Kerala is also, especially the northern Kerala, is a hotbed of Islamic extremism. That's a reality. And that's not taken very seriously by much people. But that's to be seen. You are very right. And also there have been recruits to ISIS from Kerala. Kerala is comparatively a progressive place. There are very liberal people in Kerala. Kerala is advanced very much in public health and all these kind of things. But radicalism also reached there, especially with the proximity to the Gulf countries, because a lot of Keralites work in Gulf countries. And probably that's one of the reasons that these new radical ideas came into being in Kerala. Secondly, whether, US would consider India as a player. These are things which we have to actually see in the coming days. Because also, whether India can simply go into the hands of USA or should we play our own strategy is something one has to see. Every country at the end of the day has to have its own strategic interests, and we should make its own strategy based on its own interest. So without getting into in somebody's interest to somebody's game, India should have its own policy. And thirdly, as you rightly said, the waste of money. No, it's not a waste of money. I would still feel, I'm still an optimist about things. I'm very hard optimist. I still believe that things will change because these kind of dark forces cannot remain eternally in power, and this has to change. If dark ages in Europe for centuries could change, this small influence of the radical Islamic forces for some time would not remain. Maybe 10 years, maybe 15 years, maybe even 2 years, things will change and it has to change. But next time, now we have to study a lesson from history. We have to educate people and equip people and empower the people. That's a solution, not empowering the governments and military. Empowering the people would make big difference. Leaders will emerge from them and they will change. That's what we have to do. Thank you. Thank you very much. Prakash. Prakash has talked already? No.
Not yet.
Not yet. So Prakash, why don't you speak?
With Biden's decision to withdraw from Afghanistan, the position of a world elder brother is vacant. In future, whom you anticipate to take over that elder brother role? Or do we need an elder brother to set right the things whenever the things go out of order in the world?
Well, I mean, see, the USA has been playing the big brother or elder big brother role earlier. They have been pretending or trying to be the policeman of the world earlier. But I think those kind of things, I mean, Soviet Union was trying to play also the same kind of role in some other part of the world. But those kind of one superpower taking care of everything as the master of all the countries, those times are coming to an end. I think more and more cooperations and alignments would happen now, like European Union, like what we could develop eventually in the South Asian Regional Alliance in SAARC, or the Benelux countries, or the Baltic countries. The regional alliances are getting more powerful because they have common interest and common economic interest, and more open trade centers are emerging. And such centers would be more powerful in the future is my judgment about things, but it can be also. But also there is no single power acceptable coming up now. China is emerging as a big economic and military power, but China is not acceptable because of the, at least officially, of their ideology. And also, I don't know whether China would be acceptable by the whole world as a global player. I mean, real big player like earlier US tried to play. I think those times are coming slowly at end, and regional groups are getting more and more powerful, and their alliances would would create more space for dialogue and discussion and common understanding and more valuable laws coming up. For example, European Union with the European Parliament at one side, European judicial system. If any country goes beyond certain limits, one can go to the European Court, which is based on an egalitarian and equitable way of understanding this. Such regional groups could be the solution for the future, in my opinion. But well, history is not in our hands. But that's my observation and judgment. Whatever could come, let's wait and see. The weakness of United Nations, it has no military power. And the veto power given to all these 5 countries, sometimes it stops United Nations to take major decisions at crucial times. It can be vetoed. So the understanding that we have about the failure of League of Nations, paved the way for the rise of United Nations. Perhaps I don't think that United Nations should go. We don't have a better thing available now. Perhaps we can have a better system, or better than United Nations, collectively made, and then this will go to past, like League of Nations. But at this moment, there is no better international possibility. I don't consider, organizations like NATO, which has a military interest only, would be an alternative to United Nations. There can be a better international organization, but at this moment we have only United Nations in that position. It should not go. It can be, though it is not that effective, but it's still an international public opinion force, and it has other agencies like UNESCO and UNICEF and all these kind of things, which part of that, WHO and all these kind of things. That's important.
Why it is silent in the present crisis?
That's very clear. Number one, there is no regime. There is no overthrow of a government. And they cannot take a position because any resolution brought in by any country, no country has brought in a resolution, not a single country. If any country bring a resolution, it's very clear and obvious that one of the superpowers, either China or Russia, would veto it. Especially China would veto it. So it would not pass. That's why I said superpowers have an extraordinary role in United Nations, which can hamper any kind of strong moves.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now, Unnikrishnan Raman.
Thanks for giving the chance, Mr. Sanal. My question.
You have talked already once again.
But you said one more point and add. I'm a Malayali. You also Malayali. Now I feel the controversial or the 1921 and 2021, the 100 years of the one, what is happening in the North Kerala. As you said, in the North Kerala is the Islamic terrorist, or I'm not saying the terrorist, but it's what is happening and everybody knows.
Radicalism.
Now the Malayalam word is coming from Taliban. So what is the feeling? What is your opinion? What is happening in the 15th of August? Our Independence Day, it is happening the same day in Taliban also. So the Malayali feeling or the Hindu of the Malayali feeling, it is happening for the Kashmiri Pandit. It is happen or not? What's your opinion about that? Thank you.
See, being a Malayali, being a Keralite, I can say that Kerala is not India. Kerala is a very tiny part of India. For example, in Indian Parliament, there are 540 members and Kerala sends only 20 members to that parliament. That's the size of Kerala. It's a very small, tiny part. Kerala becomes important only because it has almost 100% literacy and there's a lot of journalists from Kerala, a lot of artists from Kerala, and it has become a kind of a model of many sorts. But also, Kerala was very famous for its very powerful rationalist movements. Nearly 200 different groups are there, all very active at one side. And on the other side, it has a liberal background. It has an all-accommodative political structure and all shades of politics you can see in Kerala. But also Kerala is a conservative society. That's also one has to see. See, we have, for example, in many other parts of India, for example, in Delhi, a couple can go hand in hand or they can live in one room or one house if they are not married also. But in Kerala, if you try to do that, there will be immediately a moral police coming and beating up the people. So Kerala is, one way it's very progressive, on the other side it behaves like medieval people. Keralites have this element coming up more and more. So on the one side, Kerala is very progressive, and as you rightly said, it's a hotbed of Islamic extremism in the northern part of Kerala. It's a ground reality. So one has to see Kerala not with since I am from Kerala, I need not be too proud about Kerala just because of that. I have to see things as you also that the problems in Kerala is looked. Many people look at Kerala with great expectation because Kerala has produced a lot of fine people. But also, if Kerala goes very radical, and radical forces have a big influence in Kerala societies, and that will be a very negative contribution of Kerala to the Indian society. As you have seen, there have been women recruited from Kerala in ISIS. 4 people were arrested in Afghanistan. They were in jail and they were now released by the Taliban forces in Afghanistan. So that did not happen in many other parts of India. It happened in Kerala. So I don't want to be just proud about Kerala. I mean, it's a biological coincidence that I'm a Malayali. I mean, I would just like to see that. I'm happy that Kerala is doing well, and I'm happy that I'm a Malayali. But that doesn't give a false nationalistic pride or anything about Kerala for me. I would like that language. That's a language I used to write. That is my mother tongue. But still, we have to be watchful about Kerala also. Kerala can give a wrong signal, and that's to be corrected if that is so. You and me, we all coming from Kerala, should be able to correct if Kerala goes in a wrong direction. If it's going to the radical forces, as opinion leaders, we should come out against that. We should talk to people. We should try to change it. And everybody's contribution is important. Your contribution is important. My contribution may be important. All other people from Kerala who are thinking about this, their all contributions are important. That's how changes come. I believe that more than political leaders, opinion leaders can change things and they can influence things, and that can have great influence. That's what we are trying to do this in these meetings also. So let's try not to be too optimistic, but carefully watching and beware of the dangers hiding here and there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Amarnath.
Yeah, hi sir. Actually, sorry, I am sitting in a car, so there is no light here, so I'm not opening.
Okay.
Sir, I am also from. I just asked my question already. So, but I just hearing your words. I am worried little because I am also a Malayali. You know that I know. I am from northern part of Kerala, Kannur. So I am also little worried about these things because of hearing the newses around. And I also heard that there was a Malayalam word from a Taliban militant. That also I also read that newspapers, and I am also a little worried. Do you have any advice to me that for that?
Well, don't be afraid of anything, because if you are afraid, you cannot do anything. All what you have to do is, it's all people who make the difference. It's people who decide that there is change happening in this world, and we are amongst those who are influencing the opinion. Don't be afraid. Don't sit down. Talk to people. Be active. Try to change Kerala or India or any other part of the world a better place by making it more liberal, more open, more tolerant. And I mean, we should not allow this world to go to extremism, radicals. We should go forward in future. Every single voice counts. Every single opinion counts. Every single person counts. Let's not stop this effort.
Thanks, thank you. Thanks for your kind words. And I also hope that India has a strong military, and they will interfere all the matters which affecting India's integrity. That's my hope, and I trust in that case, because only India has a strong military and armed force. That's the only reason India now also being together. That's one. Okay, thank you, sir.
I think every country has the right to keep its integrity and national, boundaries so intact. And India should not go back in a situation that India's integrity is challenged. No country should go back if that happens. And let's see how things happen. But we have to understand things. That's the effort that we are trying to articulate today. To understand with the complicated structure is not just oversimplifying the structure that, oh, this is Taliban Islamic radicalism. It's not simply like that, or this is ideology. But every different factor has a contribution to making this kind of a situation. And by studying this, we are watching ourselves to avoid similar happenings in the future in wherever we are living. So let's be alert, let's be thinking, let's be articulate in our position. Thank you very much.